So the final installment in the FNAF franchise for 2024 is Return to the Pit, and it does indeed seem to show us that there is some form of time loop going on for Oswald in regards to the events that he suffers in the story, which have been replayed in not only the book but the graphic novel, the game, and now this interactive novel. And we see that this starts off just like the actual book, with it being the start of summer, and we see a dead possum by the road, and also that his dad has a new job at the deli. Now we see that there are many branches that can take place in this interactive story, and we find that if Oswald chooses at any point to not return to Jeff's or not go to Jeff's in the first place, he never encounters the ball pit, and what ends up happening is he lives a long life estranged from his parents. And we can infer that all the potential timelines that we see here are potentially able to happen due to the nature of the ball pit being sort of hallucination illusion. And so we find that the next major branch we have here is something that we'll come back to at the end of the story, as it involves the tokens, which are actually really important and give us some interesting connotations as to what's happening in the story. So we find here that if Oswald follows the rabbit, he dies, and it appears that he is reliving the events in the ball pit of one of the victims of the original murders. As we see in the original book, it's described as half a dozen, so 6, but here it's only described as 5, and so Oswald is taking the place of a child being lured away towards where the others are kept, so he is basically reenacting the events of one of the missing children. And we can confirm that this does indeed take place at that time, as when he returns on one of the days, we see a calendar, which notably we see in the game, which points out that this is 1985. We also see that while he is in the past, there is a potential to win 3 different prizes. We see that the Freddy figurine does not appear to have any bearing on the story whatsoever. However, the flashlight does seem interesting, as if we use it on the rabbit in the past, he falls and basically ends up banging his head and convulsing, and after this the ball pit vanishes and traps Oswald in the past, implying that the ball pit and its mechanisms are integrally tied to this rabbit creature as part of the remnant construct. And the third item that we can win is the bunny ears, which become important later on in the story. Now we find half the token in the past. This may seem to imply that only the events we are seeing in the past are in actual fact part of the illusion, but as we come to see later, it appears that all events surrounding Oswald are part of the illusion. And so just like in the book, when Oswald returns to the present, the dad rabbit scenario occurs where the rabbit takes his dad into the ball pit and then takes his place, and no one seems to be able to realise that the rabbit is replacing his dad, as Oswald appears to be the only one who sees the rabbit. And we get our next major branch in potential timelines here, as if Oswald refuses to go along with the rabbit pretending to be his father, there tends to be multiple instances where the rabbit just runs you down with the car. But the other potential timeline this leads to is when he runs next door, he finds that his next door neighbour is in fact now Chica, which shows us that the present is also not the real world. This is an illusion. Chica is replacing his neighbour. And the final timeline of the not accepting the dad rabbit seems to give us the fact that there is a resistance that exists in this world who know of the rabbit and are actively plotting against it, and these are led by Chip, who is now a grown-up, as Oswald met him in the past, and now he has aged the full way up to reach the present. And it is also revealed that Chip is actually the father of Gabriella, who we meet in the other versions of this story. And we can infer that based on this being a branching timeline scenario, that this has always been the case. Gabriella has always been Chip's child, and Oswald just has never realised this. And each of the Resistance timeline branches ends with the Resistance attempting to return to Jeff's and take out the rabbit. However, none of them seem to realise that the rabbit is in actual fact the leader of their group, who, based on what knowledge we have, must infer then that Oswald's dad is in actual fact the one leading the resistance group, and no one else just puts together that they are father and son because the rabbit posing as the father doesn't give this information to anyone. This also begs the question as to whether any of the other people that are part of the resistance are in actual fact just part of the illusion world, or whether they are actually other beings who have become trapped in the illusion world that are sentient and know that something is going on. Now, if Oswald instead chooses to allow the rabbit to play the part of his dad, then he goes to school as normal, meets Gabriella, and is encouraged by her and her love of Greek heroes in order to face off against the rabbit. We get a slight branch at this point where we find that the bunny ears appear to only be able to cause bad endings for you, as putting on the bunny ears ends up sort of indoctrinating you into the rabbit's world. It makes you just submit to the rabbit's will and join into the fantasy world. Now, if Oswald chooses not to use the bunny rabbit ears, then he ends up fleeing the house and making his way to Jeff's, where if you make the correct choices, it ends up ending just like the story always does, with the rabbit being caught in the netting and therefore Oswald and his dad escape. And it's interesting to note at this point that we definitely get confirmation that this present is not real, as Oswald finds the other half of the token here, and then the two pieces just magically click together. And it's with this token that we're allowed to replay the events, which implies to us that Oswald is indeed looping through the events. And using the token, we now find that when we go to 1985, we can use the token to access the arcades, and we discover at this point that the secret story is unlocked where the world becomes 8-bit. So therefore, I believe that what we are seeing here is a progressive timeline of the loops throughout the different variations of the story. The book happens first and shows us Oswald getting caught in the loop, and then the interactive novel occurs, which leads on to the events of the game. So while we are playing the game, we are actually seeing Oswald after he's collected the token and is now trapped in the never-ending loop. And we see that it is canon at this point then that he continuously revives over and over again. And then the one way to get a happy ending in this environment seems to be that you have to save the missing children. You have to rescue them from the party room and try and get them out of the pizzeria. However, getting them out doesn't actually win the game. Instead, the only way to win is to give them the cake and make it their happiest day, which seems to defeat the entity and allows the happy ending to occur, which is very similar to the happy ending we see in the game, where Jeff's Pizza is now successful and everyone is happy. Which begs the question of, if the game is indeed showing us the Stitch Wraith in the window as proof that this is in the ball pit and the Stitch Wraith is saving Oswald's soul like he does with the other characters in the epilogues, then it makes sense to infer that this happy ending is being given to Oswald to give him peace, as the two endings are very, very similar. It appears that Jeff sells the arcade games in order to allow his business to be successful. And there is also a small part that branches at one point in this story, which gives us a massive lore drop as to what is actually happening within the ball pit here, as at a certain point Oswald is able to flee after seeing the dead missing children. And when he does this, there are two options he can take. He can go outside and run away, which ages him rapidly up until the present, and no one actually believes he is who he is because he is now an old man, which is very similar to the ending we get randomly if we just leave the building in the game. However, the other option we get here is to go into a cellar, and in this cellar we find what appears to be a plush baby doll, implying Baby or Eleanor is in some way behind all of these events, which makes sense as she is the main antagonist in the Frights books, causing all of the incidents in order to harvest Remnant. And this may imply, as so many parts of the series have in recent years, that they are setting up Baby's return in some way.